welcome to another episode of the program. I have the pleasure of speaking to some incredible people, some leaders who are at the very top end of their game from around the world. And today is a person from within the United Kingdom. I think I've just timed it perfectly to speak to this individual. Dan Edwards, I came across him on LinkedIn a while ago now. We've had a few conversations and he's at a very, very exciting point in his life, to be honest. And it reminds me of how it felt when I left the police service after 32 years. So Dan has been involved in the education sector for, I think, around about 2010, working in both primary school and secondary school education. For the last 5 years, he's worked in school leadership, and he finished his work in education last Friday as an executive principal. And Dan is as inspired as I was to work with organizations around creating the right kind of culture to get the very best out of your people. Dan, first and foremost, welcome to the show. And secondly, congratulations on a new life.
Thank you very much. It already feels a little bit surreal. I think it will feel a lot stranger when term restarts, and I'll notice that friends of mine are returning back to the classrooms and the offices, and I see pupils walk down the road back to school, and I'll be there sitting there going, crikey, either I've made the best decision ever or I'm going to miss it wholeheartedly. But I don't know. Either way, it was the right time for me at the right moment. So yeah, it'll be very strange come September.
If my experience is anything to go by, I think you'll have a bit of both. You'll have a bit of, I used to be there, I used to do that, I used to be somebody in that sector, and now I'm on this this journey, this lonesome journey, all by myself. But trust me, there's lots and lots of people on a similar journey, and you and I have already connected, and I'm sure that we'll connect with lots of other great people. My wife's a teacher, so I know about this whole term mentality. She counts the whole year through terms. So she's like, 5 weeks to go. And 5 weeks to what? 5 weeks to the next term break, you know? So she's particularly excited now because I think they've got like a week or so left at school. I don't even count it. So she's got like 2 weeks, I think she said, without kids. Now she's just preparing for the next year. But that's what your life has been like for the last, 10, 12, 13 years, hasn't it?
Yeah, and I suppose it is very strange because, you know, the normal calendar of events doesn't really appeal because in some ways you are programmed in this kind of September to July kind of routine, and it is nice and it is good and it is kind of useful in that way. But it does feel that, you know, it'd be nice to end a year when everybody does end a year, and you kind of can make that kind of resolution or that reflection with everybody else rather than trying to wait to the end. So no, it has been. I think my training year started in 2005. I came into teaching very, very late. I didn't particularly have the greatest suite of GCSEs or qualifications when I left school. I wasn't probably the most academic. I probably wasn't the best behaved, but I ended up kind of going back to night school when I was about 28, getting my maths GCSE and the relevant bits and pieces together to then start my training in 2005. And dare I say it was the hardest year, but it was the best year because you knew that you'd made the right choice. It was that career for you. It's that thing of, you know, the shoes fitted really well, and you just kind of went, yeah, this is where I'm heading, and this is where I need to be.
You were working, but you were going to night class to get your maths GCSE, but then of course you must have had to go and get your degree. Were you working while you were doing all of that as well?
I managed to get my degree. I managed to get through. I had a bit of a turbulent would be the right word, sixth form time. But I did a subject that I enjoyed. I worked within drama and theatre studies, and I thoroughly enjoyed that as a practice. And I went to university, and had a really great time there. I went to university in Northampton, and I did a very interesting degree, should I say. It wasn't the typical drama and performing arts degree. It was something quite avant-garde and quite contemporary, but it was eye-opening. And yeah, unfortunately, I had a degree, but I didn't, because of the the time period of which I was going to qualify, I needed a maths GCSE, and I found maths completely alien to me when I was at school. I tried to get my maths GCSE, I failed, tried again, failed, lost interest, tried again, tried to do everything, but it was just completely out of my grasp. And so I resigned myself to the fact that teaching just wasn't going to happen. And I ended up working within residential social care, working with some of the most vulnerable children within Leicester and Leicestershire. And immediately then I knew that working with young children, working with children who had an element of disadvantage to their start in life, whether that be their own fault or by someone else, teaching was the way forward, and opening a pen or giving them the opportunity to read or giving them the opportunity to write was something I needed to do. So yeah, every Tuesday evening I returned back to night school, and I was taught by a wonderful gentleman called Jim, who got me through my maths. Hook or by crook, he got me there. He did what many teachers who I thoroughly respected couldn't do along the way, and that was it. And that opened the door then to the graduate teacher program, as it was, where it was a program for people who'd been in profession to go and retrain as teachers. And and like I say, that was the story.
You were inspired by Jim, which really feeds into this whole philosophy around how teachers are leaders first and foremost. Throughout the entirety of your life, some of the greatest influences in your life are, aside from your parents, are your teachers. And if you have a good teacher, you'll be inspired by them to do good things. If you have a bad teacher, they can actually mar you for the rest of your life. In your journey in education, what did you learn about leadership?
I think for me, I suppose going back to my earlier time as working within secondary schools, bigger organisations, lots of staff, and I suppose sometimes the propensity to maybe slightly feel quite anonymous within bigger organisations, that you are a part of a cog in a wheel. I taught a subject which was quite discreet. I was teaching drama and theatre studies. I was the only drama and theatre studies within the secondary school building. And I think one of the things that I noticed was we had a change of principal in my final 2 years at that school, who was able then to just start to recognise people beyond their titles or beyond their job description, and actually start forging people together in a way which kind of really consolidated everybody. And rather than being kind of pigeonholed in regards to various subjects, the drama teacher, the English staff, the PE staff, all of a sudden we became one. And that was very powerful, because it was something that I'd never noticed before on my journey. I'd always worked in schools which, you did feel a little bit on the threshold of things. And I think when I started to move into my own journey of leadership, there was something quite powerful about that. And it was something that I took forward myself, into only last week, in regards to how I developed my team and how I wanted the school to feel, was very much that it was people first. It wasn't about titles. It wasn't about hierarchy. It wasn't about, what pay scale you're on. We were all people, all humans, there for one single thing, and that was to improve the life chances of children through education.
That's brilliant. And when you are collectively focused on the common goal, then I think there's so much synergy and so much energy that comes from that. I love how you describe that principal who look beyond the titles. I think you said, look beyond the title, look beyond the bounds of who you are. It reminds me of a quote that I think is one of the most inspiring quotes for me. I heard it back in 1990. I went on probably my first ever personal development course. And back in 1990, personal development courses were, not really out there, were they? I almost had to do it in secret because people thought it was a bit woo-woo. But I remember on this personal development course that this quote, which has resonated with me and almost sort of inspired me to be the leader that I am and I was. And that is that the mark of an outstanding leader is not how good a leader you are, but how many leaders you create. which really is what you're describing there. That as a leader, what you did was to look to your team to say, how can I better my team? And for me, it's almost like a conveyor belt, isn't it? That we know that eventually we're going to fall off the conveyor belt, and we need to know that there are other leaders following us on this conveyor belt to take up the posts that we were in.
I think that's right. I mean, when I first came to my school, so I started my headship journey 4.5 years ago, I would say thrown in at the deep end. I hadn't been a head before. It was a challenging school. It was a challenging school, and it had a whole raft of issues and problems and nuances and small bits of, you know, complexities that you needed to unravel. And I think for me, the most important way that I approached it was I was not going to be spending my time trying to think about what I needed to be.
Yeah.
I didn't want to sort of go, if I go, you know, I thought if I spend my time trying to work out who I need to pretend to be as a head teacher or a persona, I just rolled my sleeves up and said, right, this is me. I haven't really got a clue about what we're doing, but what we'll do is we'll all do it together, but I'll be the one that carries the can and I've got everybody's back. And I think for me, that was really powerful. And you talked then about succession planning. You know, when lots of schools and lots of organisations, I'm sure, is very similar to the police. You know, you might get someone drafted in who is a bit of a hitman, a bit of a hero, head teacher or a hero, you know, chief constable who can just go in there, turn the ship around, and then actually when they leave, it just resets itself to where it was before, because actually all they've done is they've not thought about the succession of, as you say, the conveyor belt, who's going to carry the mantle further. So I was really pleased to leave with my deputy stepping up as acting principal and my assistant principal stepping up as deputy, and one of my more experienced teachers then stepping up their role. And as I was working over another school as well, that one of my assistant principals then became the head of school over there. So I think when you think about leaving a place or leaving an organisation at the right time, it's about thinking, actually, have I outgrown this?
Isn't it also about creating a culture that is fertile, that continues to grow? So I think how you've described it, and I have seen these in the police service and in other organisations, where you get this sort of incredible leader that comes in, shakes a place up, gets it really efficient, creates whatever they create, and it all performs very, very well. But what they haven't done is create a culture that is a sustainable culture, that is a people-led culture where people are invested in that. So consequently, I mean, I'm guessing what you're going to see with the schools that you were responsible for is, now that you've gone and your deputy has stepped up and everyone steps up one level higher, is that they will now take what you've done and build upon it.
Here's hoping.
Let's hope they do.
I suppose the way that we developed our schools and the way in which we developed the organisation was very much with a sense of collegiality. You know, it wasn't about my idea; it was about everybody.
Yeah,
having a sense of consultation, having a sense of agency. You know, being an advocate for the opinions of support staff, of premises staff, of administrative and clerical staff. All of those people still have a say in regards to how a school should run. And I think sometimes schools are very much seen through the lens of how good the teaching and learning is. Well, that's, you know, it's one part of the scenario, because if your school is unsafe and it, you know, fails to have clean water coming through the drinking taps, it doesn't really matter what goes on in the classroom. You know, if your safeguarding procedures when a member of staff or a visitor comes into the school aren't up to scratch, it doesn't matter how effective your curriculum is. So it's about people noticing that although teachers are put on the forefront of the PR side of schools and education, there's a whole lot of people behind the scenes who don't get the acknowledgement they need, that is about successful school leadership.
I've seen this in so many organizations, Dan. I saw it obviously in the police service where everything was seen through the eyes of a police officer, when actually there's an incredible organization and support services that sit behind the police officer, allowing them to be able to do at the front line what they do. But without all of these other people, the police service would not have existed or performed. And I saw this very similar thing with a culture diagnosis that I did with a healthcare provider only a couple of months ago. And they were saying there's this big rift between the clinical staff and what they described as a corporate services staff. That's all the support staff that sit behind the clinical services. So all the clinicians got all the recognition, the reward, and it was always seen through their eyes in terms of how the organization moves forward. But actually the organization was making a lot of mistakes because they hadn't seen through the lenses of all of these other incredible staff and services that were on offer. So I think the CEO there recognized that, which was a good thing. And I think, the right kind of leader will know that whenever you're leading any kind of an organization, you have to see it through the collective eyesight or perspective of all members of your staff. And I think you've just alluded to it, that as the leader, you don't have the monopoly on good ideas. And, very often you have to test these ideas or welcome ideas from your staff. And that's, for me, is where cognitive diversity comes from. So did you have a process in mind by which you could collect the thoughts of your people, your staff, your workers to, move the schools forward that you were responsible for?
You saying they're not having the monopoly on ideas is completely, true, and something that lots of leaders, I think, new to school leadership or leadership in general seem to forget very quickly, not out of, not out of any sort of sense of, ego, but more to the fact is that we're really reluctant in wanting to look like we're, weak, or look like that we need to speak to people to find out or how to fix things. We're seen as the top dog. We're seen as someone there who's got all the ideas, and and I think that's really dangerous. And I worry and I think we've spoken before. I worry a lot about a retention issue in education, and as much as anything within the public sector, you see lots of experienced members of staff leaving the profession for many reasons, and with the best will in the world, we're seeing lots of people move into leadership probably too quickly, who probably don't have that kind of understanding of themselves or understanding of their own kind of emotional intelligence to be able to think, actually, I don't need to have all the answers. I just need to be able to approach the right people and consult with the right people in my organization. So, when I was there, people would come to me and say, what should we do about lunchtimes? Because lunchtimes was pretty, like most schools, sometimes horrific. There was basketballs flying everywhere, cricket, everything. It was like running the gauntlet across one side of the playground to the other. If you didn't have your head taken off by a rogue basketball, you'd see that as a success.
I can imagine.
So rather than me coming up with how should we improve lunchtime, I spoke to the support staff who are in charge of dinner time and on the playground every single day, and it's those members of support staff who have historically been at schools for many, many years. They've been there because they work tirelessly in the background, preparing lessons, supporting teachers, who see the school in the truest and honest way, and in the most, warts and all manner. So it was a case of just speaking to people, walking around every single day. What do you think of this? Do you like this? Can I have a quick word with you? Can I just show you this? And actually through that just general ongoing dialogue and and it's ongoing consultation, you're always capturing the voice of others, listening to them, finding out, what do you think of that? How did that go? How was that assembly? Was that my assembly okay? Not because you're kind of, fishing for compliments, but you just want to make sure that you're doing the best by everybody. And actually, when someone says to you, you could do this a little bit better, or have you thought about this? You want to develop a culture in which people can feel comfortable to say, I can speak to the head. or I can speak to the person in charge, because actually they'll listen. And some of the best decisions we've made as a school have not come from me at all, and not naturally that it should, but actually through all of us sitting down together and listening.
I think if you really analyze it, the vast majority of decisions aren't made by the top person. The vast majority of decisions are made by everybody else but the top person. And that, for me, in that role of leadership, is about creating a culture where, and I'm talking about cognitive diversity. You know, I steer towards the terminology of cognitive diversity rather than demographic diversity, where we're chasing targets for one protected characteristic or not. For me, to really get the culture changed is to be able to welcome difference of thought. And that's got to be the utopia of where we want to get to. But when you have that culture, then all of these beautiful, wide variety of ideas can come through, and the person at top just keeps a hand on the tiller and steers in the right direction. And that, surely, for me, I used to laugh to say, you know, the higher up you go in leadership, the less busy you actually are. You're more busy in your brain as opposed to being busy physically.
Completely. And I think if you've got the right people in the right places and you've got the right culture, people, and especially as well, people start thinking like a leader as well. If they kind of go, you know, there's a wonderful book, I can't remember the name of the author, but it was called Turn the Ship Around, and it was written by David Marquette, a naval captain who was a submariner and was in charge of quite literally turning the ship around. He took a probably the worst naval submarines and the worst performing naval submarines in the US Army, US Navy, and basically made everybody in that ship think like him by asking them, as soon as they came to him and asked him for a question, should I do this? He would say, what do you think I will say? What do you think I will do? And all of a sudden he developed that mindset where people were going, actually, what would Dan do? Or what would, actually, I can see what I'll do now.
I find that quite intriguing, because essentially what he's doing is, I had a boss, and he had on his office door, he'd write on his office door, don't come to me with problems, come to me with solutions. And I think there's something in that, in terms of, if you are always problem focused, you're always going to be thinking about problems. And therefore your whole psyche, your culture will be very problem focused sort of psyche. You'll always be looking at the negative. I always try to encourage people, and it clearly, David Marquette had the same philosophy, that you get people to think of their own solutions, as well as the problem. You know what the problem is or the challenge is, but you think around that and widen your thought process to think of solutions. And some of these solutions might be impractical, might be impossible, might be difficult, but nonetheless you think of those solutions, and that feeds into this whole cognitive diversity as well. No answer is a stupid answer type of thing.
Completely.
And it sounds like this is something that you built into the psyche of the whole of your schools where you were, but that's past you now. That's like an episode that's gone. So what does the future look like for you?
I'm very interested in developing that kind of cultural organization within other schools. I'm very interested to talk about the journey that we went on. I'm very interested and quite passionate about consultation within organizations. Mm-hmm. If we think about, an organization of 100 people, probably less than 10% of those are making the most high profile decisions for the majority of the workforce. We see lots of retention issues around education, public sector.
Particularly in the current climate.
Definitely. And I think we've become a very different, I think our values have changed. I think we've spent 2 years clinging on to our families, being close to home. And actually now we see work as, some of us are more lucky than not to see maybe work as an option that can be changed, and not something which has always been that mainstay, that actually people can start thinking different.
Yeah, I think you're right.
And with the cost of living crisis as well that's coming up, how many people will be willing to travel half that 2-hour commute?
I think what's happened, Dan, over the last couple of years, there's been like this recalibration of priorities, because so many people have been so close to, I don't know, illness or disaster, or in their own mindset, because that's what the media have been throwing at us. that we've all recalibrated what's important, what's my real priority. So you might have been a workaholic 2 or 3 years ago, but for a lot of people, that's now shifted, hasn't it? And it's that I think it's that gap that people like you and I are now coming into, where we're seeing that the organizations have changed. We've seen that communities have reshaped themselves, but people have now shifted their priorities. They think in a different way. And consequently, if the people are thinking in a different way, then organizations, to get the very best out of these people, also need to think in a different way. And we need to move away from, I mean, it was only a few years ago that I used to sit in boardroom tables where we talked about flexible working and allowing people to work from home. And, you'd have the old stalwart saying, no, we're not going to do that because I can't trust them to do the work. Oh, our infrastructure is not there. We don't have the security of the IT is not going to be there. When then literally within months, we had all of that sorted. And it's worked, and it continues to work. So I think organizations are going to have to think differently because the people are thinking differently. So consequently, you talk about this massive sort of gap, really. The issues around retention across the whole of the public sector. And I think more in the public sector because they've been at the front face of it all, haven't they? Over the last couple of years, they've had to keep the country going, so to speak. So they are the most sort of probably exhausted people that we've got, within the health sector. I know what it's been like in education. I know what it's been like in policing. And, I've been talking to dentists recently and GPs, and they're all feeling the same. They're all fatigued. So it needs people to come in to help organizations, to guide organizations to start thinking differently, to retain these people. But the other big problem, Dan, that I've seen is the recruitment issue, that everybody is recruiting for talent, but the pond of talent is decreasing for some reason. So one of the things, I guess, is if you have a really, really great culture, the culture speaks as the personality of the organization, and more people are likely to join your organization. I think that's one of the biggest benefits of adapting a really positive culture.
And I think for me, it's about schools and organisations that I hope to work with, identifying what their culture is, because, like you say, we've had especially when we're looking at graduate, entry level jobs or those kinds of things. We've seen lots of people who have had a very fragmented education background. We've seen lots of people go through their degrees at home, virtually, and we've seen lots of children and lots of students complete their A levels virtually. So it's that, as much as there is the content that's been learned and successfully kind of assessed, the interpersonality of those experiences of being in a sixth form college or 3 years at university have been sadly missed. So I think what organisations have got to do, and especially schools, and especially maybe other areas of the public sector, is to have a culture where you can identify the right character. Because if you can match your culture, you have to develop a culture first of all. But once you've developed your culture and you can find the character that fits that, you can take them on the journey to develop that skill set. I think we've got to look at, we're not going to find the finished article. We're not going to find people operating at the same possible level that we were before.
But isn't this one of the big issues, that for too long organizations have always relied upon the technical skills or the qualifications of an individual rather than the values of the individual, the psyche of the individual, to see, will this individual actually fit into and align with the values of our organization?
Yeah.
I had a very interesting podcast with a deputy chief constable of a brand new police force that was being set up in Surrey, British Columbia in Canada. And she was saying, look, what I've learned in policing in all the places I've worked is that we recruit for technical skills, but I can teach those technical skills. What I want to recruit for is values. So she has been recruiting for this brand new police force, everybody based on values. And, I reached out to her and said, hey, how's it going? And she said, you know what? It's one of the best organizations I've ever worked for. The people here, we just gel. Everybody just seems to want to make it like the best organization in the world. So we'll have her back on this program. But that's exactly what you're talking about there, Dan, isn't it?
It is. And you can move mountains with that. If you've got everybody aligned to the same values, it doesn't matter where the people are personally on their skills kind of skills continuum, because you develop your skills over time, and dare I say, you could have been in profession for many, many years. Does it make you the most skillful? Does it make you the immediate go-to? Does it make you the best? Because actually, if you're moving through your career without the right values, you're not going to give too much notice or very little care about your skill development. But if you've got the right people tuned at the right values, there's a critical mass there of interpersonalities. There's a critical mass there about culture. There's a critical mass there about like-minded people. And it sounds a bit qualitative in regards to the outcome, and it sounds a bit, it's great that we all get on, but actually there's a lot to say in regards to how quickly that qualitative aspect of your organisation can turn into the quantitative and actually move forward with some really key measures of progress.
What fantastic deep thoughts to finish on, really. And I'm going to leave it with your last message there, which is essentially we need to start moving away from measuring everything from a quantitative point of view. I go into so many organizations and they will inevitably say, okay, so if I bring emotional intelligence into my organization, how's that going to affect my bottom line? Where are the tangible benefits? We need to shift that mindset to have the simple understanding that a happy workforce is going to be a productive workforce. A productive workforce will deliver all of your quantitative needs going forward. But you have to look after your people forward. Dan, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on here. We will talk, no doubt. I wish you all the best in everything that you do, and I hope you get to reshape some organizations.
Thank you, Kul. Take care.